You believe you are free because there are no physical chains around your wrists. But look closer at your anxieties, your dependence on the approval of others, and your endless pursuit of external validation. True captivity is rarely forged in iron. It is woven from the fabric of your own unexamined desires and aversions. You are a prisoner to every circumstance that dictates your emotional state, handing the keys of your serenity to an unpredictable world. What if the ultimate paradox of human existence is that true autonomy has absolutely nothing to do with your external environment? This is the foundational premise of Stoicism, an ancient Hellenistic philosophy that teaches the development of self-control and fortitude as a means of overcoming destructive emotions. It is not, as modern misconception suggests, the suppression of feeling, but the mastery of your judgments about those feelings. When you understand that distress stems not from events themselves, but from your interpretation of those events, you unlock an impregnable fortress within. Consider the life of Epictetus. He was born a slave in Hierapolis, deep within the sprawling machinery of the Roman Empire. His very existence was defined by subjugation, his body the legal property of Epictetus, a wealthy and powerful freedman who served Emperor Nero. By every societal metric of his time and ours, Epictetus was a man completely devoid of agency. He was a piece of living property, subject to the whims, cruelties, and demands of a master. Yet, within this crucible of absolute physical constraint, a profound internal rebellion took shape. The young captive recognized a fundamental division in the architecture of reality. He saw that the world was split into things he could control and things he could not. His body, his status, his wealth, and his very survival were entirely in the hands of others. If he anchored his peace to any of these external variables, he would remain a victim forever, his inner life as battered as his physical form. The radical shift occurred when he turned his gaze inward. Epictetus discovered that while the empire owned his flesh, it could not touch his volition. His judgments, his intentions, his desires, and his aversions belonged solely to him. This was the ultimate realization of personal agency. He could be commanded to fetch water, but he could not be commanded to feel humiliated by the act unless he consented to that humiliation. We face a similar psychological friction today, often manifesting as cognitive dissonance. This is the mental discomfort experienced by someone holding two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values, particularly when their actions conflict with their core identity. You experience this when you claim to value freedom, yet continuously allow a difficult boss, a fluctuating bank account, or a volatile relationship to dictate your happiness. The ancient philosopher resolved this dissonance not by changing his environment, but by restructuring his mind. Where are you currently bleeding power? You likely possess wealth and liberties that an ancient captive could scarcely imagine, yet you suffer. You suffer because you have tied your emotional equilibrium to the opinions of strangers, the trajectory of your career, and the unpredictable behavior of those around you. You are demanding that the universe conform to your preferences, and you are breaking yourself against the rocks of reality when it refuses. The wisdom Epictetus later imparted was compiled by his student Arian in a series of texts known as the Discourses. These teachings were not abstract metaphysical musings meant for idle scholars. They were a rigorous, practical manual for psychological survival. They detailed the precise mechanics of reclaiming your mind from the tyranny of external events. He taught that it is not things that trouble us, but our opinions about those things. A legendary anecdote illustrates the terrifying depth of his conviction. It is said that his master, in a fit of sadistic rage, began twisting his leg in an instrument of torture. The slave did not scream or beg for mercy. He calmly warned his master that if he continued, the leg would break. When the bone finally snapped, he simply looked at the man and said, "I told you it would break." That moment redefines the very concept of power. The master held all the physical dominance, yet he was the one enslaved by his own uncontrolled anger and cruelty. The physically broken man remained entirely sovereign. True success is not the accumulation of external leverage over others. It is the cultivation of an inner citadel so resilient that no external force can breach its walls. Achieving this level of fortitude requires confronting the darkest corners of your own psyche. It demands engaging in shadow work. This psychological practice involves uncovering and integrating the repressed, ignored, or hidden aspects of your personality, the unconscious fears and desires that secretly drive your reactive behaviors. Until you illuminate these hidden vulnerabilities, you will continue to project your internal chaos onto the external world, blaming circumstance for your own lack of discipline. Centuries later, this profound emphasis on individual agency would echo through existentialism, a philosophical movement emphasizing individual existence, freedom, and choice, positing that humans define their own meaning in an absurd world. Long before modern thinkers argued that existence precedes essence, a crippled philosopher in antiquity was living the proof. He demonstrated that even if you are handed a script of suffering and servitude, you alone author the meaning of that experience. Look closely at the narratives you construct about your own limitations. You say you cannot start that venture because the economy is poor. You claim you cannot find peace because your childhood was difficult. You argue that you cannot be disciplined because you lack the time. These are the modern chains you have forged for yourself. You are using external conditions as an alibi for internal abdication. The penalty for this abdication is severe. When you outsource your emotional regulation to the external world, you guarantee a life of perpetual anxiety. You become a leaf blown by the wind, soaring when praised and plummeting when criticized. Your entire existence becomes a frantic, exhausting campaign to control the uncontrollable, while the one domain you actually command, your own mind, lies abandoned and overgrown with weeds. Epictetus was eventually granted his freedom, though he remained physically lame for the rest of his life. He did not seek revenge against the empire that had enslaved him, nor did he pursue the trappings of wealth to overcompensate for his past deprivation. He chose exile when philosophers were banished from Rome, moving to Nicopolis in Greece. There, he opened a school, living in profound simplicity, owning nothing more than a straw mat and an earthen lamp. His classroom became a sanctuary for the most powerful men in the known world. Senators, generals, and future leaders traveled to sit at the feet of a former slave. They realized that their vast wealth and political influence offered no protection against grief, fear, and the specter of death. They came to learn the secret of true invulnerability from a man who had been stripped of everything and found himself lacking nothing. The magnetism of his teachings lay in their stark, uncompromising demand for radical responsibility. He offered no comforting illusions. He did not promise that the gods would intervene to make life easier or that practicing philosophy would result in material prosperity. Instead, he offered a far more potent weapon, the discipline of assent. This is the practice of pausing between a stimulus and your response, critically examining your initial impressions before granting them the authority of truth. As Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who was profoundly influenced by these teachings, would later write, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The emperor at the pinnacle of human power and the slave at the very bottom arrived at the exact same conclusion. The hierarchy of the world is an illusion. The only territory that matters is the space between your ears. Implementing this is the hardest work you will ever undertake. It is agonizing to catch yourself in the middle of a downward spiral of anger or despair, and force yourself to ask, is this within my control? The ego rebels against this question. It wants to blame. It wants to play the victim because victimhood is a comfortable, passive state. Taking responsibility for your own mind requires a relentless, exhausting vigilance. But the reward for this vigilance is absolute freedom. It is the ability to walk into any room, face any crisis, and endure any loss with a quiet, unshakable dignity. It means that whether you are celebrated or despised, wealthy or impoverished, healthy or sick, your core identity remains untouched. You become the master of your own fate, not by bending the universe to your will, but by bending your will to align with the unchangeable nature of the universe. The legacy of this renegade thinker is not merely a collection of ancient aphorisms. It is a living challenge to every individual who feels trapped by their circumstances. He stands across the chasm of 2 millennia, leaning on his crutch, asking you what your excuse is. He endured slavery, torture, and exile without losing his joy or his moral compass. His life destroys the myth that our happiness is contingent upon our conditions. So, what will you do with the time you have been given? Will you continue to complain about the hand you were dealt, waiting for a savior or a stroke of luck that may never come? Or will you claim the sovereign territory of your own consciousness? The moment you stop demanding that the world be easy, you become dangerous. You become untethered from the petty anxieties that consume the masses. If you refuse this path, you will remain a captive, regardless of your bank balance or your social status. You will spend your days reacting to the shadows on the wall, forever chasing a security that does not exist. The tragedies of life will crush you, and the successes will leave you empty, because neither can address the fundamental void of an unmastered mind. The ultimate synthesis of this philosophy is a profound, active acceptance of reality. It is loving your fate, whatever it may be, while fiercely protecting the integrity of your own choices. It is standing in the storm and realizing that while the wind may tear away your possessions and the rain may chill your bones, the storm cannot force you to betray your own character. You are the architect of your inner citadel. Stop building it on the shifting sands of external validation and unpredictable events. Anchor it to the bedrock of your own reasoned choice. The chains of circumstance can only bind you if you offer them your wrists. Reclaim your agency, master your perceptions, and forge a legacy of unbreakable inner freedom.